Okay, so iTrent salary modelling is an application that we built using IBM Planning Analytics technology. So as an end user, access to the application will be through the IBM Planning Analytics sign-on screen. So let me log on with my user ID and password, and we'll work our way through the application. So when we log on, we will see shortcuts to the various aspects of the application. And in this particular case, I'm logged on as a system administrator, so I can show you all aspects of the product. End users will not necessarily see all of these options. So the types of user roles are defined by the images. So here we've got system administration role. And again, I can see that because I'm a system administrator. We then have super users who can see these icons and these tasks. So these are people who can set up the system, do the maintenance, the configuration, create new versions, those sorts of things. And then your average end user, that may be a line manager or HR or finance business partner, will have access to all of these functions for reporting, analytics, dashboarding, and also for editing and updating their workforce. So before we start creating a new version, let's just very briefly have a look at a quick report and just see what data we have within the application already. So the first report we can see is our business level 1 breakdown report. Now, those of you familiar with iTrent will know that you have 3 categories that you can break your workforce down into. So you have a level 1, level 2, level 3 category. And this is what we see here is level 1, level 2, level 3. And how you use those is down to how you configure iTrent. So this will be different for every organization. But in my example, what you can see here, I'm using this to basically group together my various different departments, so whether it's finance, HR, marketing, etc. And then obviously I can see a total of them all. And the whole purpose with IBM Planning Analytics is you can use these as filters to any of the reports or any of the dashboards and the screens that you use. So now we're just looking at pure finance data. Likewise, if we wanted to look at the data by position within finance, what this will do, this is showing all the total employer costs, but showing me all the positions and job roles within that department. Now, of course, not everybody can see this data. You wouldn't want every employee to be able to see what the finance director is being paid. So this is very much secured by the security and the permissions for the user. So in this particular case, only the head of finance would probably be able to see this information. And again, if we go back to the cost breakdown screen, we can see these are all the breakdown of all the individual payroll costs rolling up to a total employment cost there. Now, at the moment, we're looking at actuals, and you can see that we've actually loaded in actuals up until the end of May. So this is data that will have come in from iTrent via the data mart. So as you do each payroll run and the data mart gets updated, you can then populate iTrent salary modelling with the latest data, and that's not only values of employment costs, but also employee data, such as start dates, leave dates, all of those sorts of things. And here, of course, we could filter this by version. We have 2 versions at the moment. We have our actuals and we have our current forecast. But I'm actually not going to use the current forecast today. What I really want to do is create a whole brand new forecast for this particular exercise. It's worth mentioning, obviously, we've got lots of other reports, standard reports that are available here, and we may get a chance to look at some of those a little bit further down the line once we've done some forecasting. So how do we create a new forecast? Well, that's done by one of the super users using version maintenance. So if we open the version maintenance option, we can see what we need to do to create a brand new forecast. We have instructions over here over on the right hand side that tells you what to do. But as an experienced user, I know that the first thing I might want to do is to create a new forecast rather than create a budget, copy a version or rerun an existing version. So I'm going to create a brand new forecast. I'm not going to create a hard copy. This is basically to give you a static version that can't be changed by other users. And it's a good way of freezing a version so you can refer to it a bit later in time and compare, your revised forecast with the original forecast, knowing it couldn't have changed. But I actually want a dynamic forecast that I can make changes and model the data and see how it goes. It knows from there that I'm creating a forecast. We have some pre-designed templates. Now, if you remember, I've got data in up to the end of period 5, so I actually want to forecast from period 6 onwards, which is what I'm going to do there. And by using a template, I can't give it a unique name. It's going to give us a standard name for that. So we're starting in financial year 2021-22, starting in period 6, and then we can choose how many years forward we're going to forecast. Now, in the sample application, we've got up to 5 years in there. You could forecast further out if you wanted to, but we've just set that drop down to be up to 5 years. And also where we're going to base the employees from. So I'm going to base this on the actuals that are coming from iTrent. So what that means is it's going to give me all my employees, all my job roles and all my positions, any dates that we have in about the employees, such as potential leave dates, people who are on maternity leave, all of that sort of stuff. That's all going to be pulled through into the forecast from the actuals that we have within iTrent. And as I mentioned earlier, it gives it a standard name. So it's called forecast because that's what it is. Forecast 6 because it's the template, and we're doing it for 2021-22, 3 years forward. So let's create that version. So it tells me up here that version was created successfully. And if we hit the next button, this will take us to a screen that just shows us how that forecast is going to be structured. So again, what you can see is I have my actuals for the first 5 periods, and then all the remaining periods are going to be forecasted for me. And then, so we're looking at 12, 24, 36, plus these 7. So we're looking at forecasting 43 periods out into the future. We move next. Again, just a confirmation screen on what we're going to do. We also have the option to make this my default version for reporting and for analysis, because this is what I'm going to use going forward. And then when we run the new version, this is now basically doing 43 payroll runs for me. So it's running each month through the system and calculating the payroll costs. And as I say, this is doing things like it's applying pay inflation. If you've got automation about how people move through the grades and scales, it will be moving people through the scale structure every year. It'll be calculating maternity pay for people who are on maternity, employers' national insurance, pensions, allowances, all of those sorts of things. And that's now completed. So we should have a forecast for the next 3 years that we can refer to. So if we just go back to that original report that we were looking at previously, you can see we've now got an additional forecast in this drop down. And if we click on it, what we'll be able to see is what the value of that forecast is for the next 3 years going forward. Obviously, this is just for the finance department. But again, if we were to say, yeah, let's have a look at all departments, then we'll get a roll-up of the whole business's payroll costs from there. So that in itself is really quite useful, and obviously, what we can do from there is drill into that information a little bit further, look into more details. Again, you can see here we've got data from January through to May, which are actuals. You can see it's forecast 7 months forward, and then over here we can see it's also forecast the next 3 years. And forecast right down to individual period. Obviously, in this example, we're running a January to December financial year, but that can be set up to mirror any financial year that you want. So in government, for instance, it could be April to March. In universities, it could be August through to July. It really depends on how you've configured the system. Again, we'll have a look at some of the other reports a little bit later. But let's just look at some of the configuration options and do some modelling of the data as well. So again, back into super user mode, let's have a quick look at configuration and have a look at some of the tweaks that we can make for the change of the model. So a couple of things that we've got in here, inflation, for instance. So in this particular example, what we're looking at here is what pay inflation is going to look like. Now, the system in this case has got a default of a 2% increase every year. And we can see that is applied here. So for each year that we're forecasting, we've got a 2% increase. Now, the green numbers, these can't be changed. These are being automatically calculated by the system based on some defaults, but we do have the ability as a user to override them. Now, you'll notice these 2% have been applied to every individual grade as well, automatically. But let's come here, for instance, and let's make an assumption that actually we're hearing that inflation's hitting a bit of a high in the UK at the moment. So maybe next year we might need to consider giving people a 3% increase rather than 2%. So let's override the 2% with the 3. And again, you can see that's been applied to every grade. We've had instances in previous projects where people want to manipulate these increases at different grade levels. So, you know, you could say that, yeah, maybe we want to do 4% for grade 2, maybe grade 4, we're just going to bring back down to 2%. And again, we can override those along the way. And in fact, here we can, if we just want to see this change, if we look at grade 2, period 1, what we can see is year on year, we can see what the scales are within that grade. So this particular system has got scale points. So starts at scale 6, goes up to scale 11. And this is what the increases are going to be based on those percentages. Just so we can see the change in there, let's do something radical. Let's say we're going to give these people a 20% increase. And what you'll see is obviously the numbers will change, the charts will change, reflecting the increases that we've just given in that year. Now, anything that we change here is going to have an instant impact on the forecast that we've just created. So I'm going to go back to the first report. And again, watch the numbers carefully, because when I refresh this report, you'll see that it's recreating the forecast and inflating the forecast based on the higher pay increases. And this is what we class as the real-time modelling capability of IBM Planning Analytics. It's one of its big powers. Other things that we can change, for instance, national insurance. Again, these are fairly standard rates that don't really change that often, and obviously once they're set up, they're absolutely fine and leave well alone. But of course, when you're forecasting, you need to make allowances for any changes that might happen. So, for instance, if the Chancellor calls a new budget and basically says that we're going to change the NI employer's threshold or the employer's NI percentage to help pay for all furlough costs and stuff like that, then we need to come in and change those rates in here. Now, you can either change a figure for the whole year, or if it's going to change at a particular point in time, then we can put a 0 in there, and that will allow us to make changes in here. So I could repeat 737 across the page and do those sorts of things if I want to, or I could type into each cell individually. It really is up to me as to what I want to do. Obviously, the same sort of things will happen with things like maternity pay. So again, we have all the standard maternity pay settings for, you know, level 1, level 2, level 3 maternity, and how many weeks you get at each level. We also have the maternity pay rates. Again, these are the sorts of things that might potentially change in a budget, for instance. So therefore, we need the ability to come in and change those and see what impact it has on our forecast if any of those things change. The allowances, again, these will be imported along with the employee data from iTrent. And if it is, we'll have a list of all the different allowances that we operate within the business. And of course, within those, you have things like, are they a one-off allowance or a recurring allowance? Do they include or not include employers' NI? Is it pensionable? Is it part of a salary sacrifice scheme? Whatever, you know, settings you've got. And therefore, obviously, you know, we can apply these allowances to any employee in the future, and the system will know how to calculate giving them those allowances. On grades and scales, again, these will get imported and loaded in from iTrent. But again, there are opportunities for you to make changes to these in future periods. Should you have plans in future to make changes to how the grades and scales work. But as they stand at the moment, a grade 2 employee will start on scale 6, and they will increment throughout the forecast until they get to scale 11, and at that point, that's when they stop incrementing for this particular grade. And obviously that, will be set up for every grade that you've got. So grade 4 will start at 16 and go up to 23. We also have what we class as scale status, and this is the sort of thing we can use for automating what a vacant position will be paid at. So, in this particular case, I think in this system, if we get a vacant position, we're going to make an assumption that the position will be forecasted as an employee coming in at the midpoint of the scale structure. But again, that's really down to you guys as to how you want that to be configured. So those are some of the super user tasks. There are some other tasks under general maintenance, and again, in this session, we won't go through all of these things. There's a lot involved, but one of them is something called mass edits. And this is something that we found is quite popular in public sector and government, and also in universities. And this allows us to make mass changes to lots of employees simultaneously. So rather than having to edit individual employees one by one, we can do a whole group of employees all in one go. So there's things that we can do there, and then various other maintenance functions. But let's switch role now. Let's come in as an end user, as a line manager or a HR business partner or a finance business partner, and look at things like edits and updates. So the purpose of the edits and updates is I, as a manager of a department, I've seen what the automated forecasters created for me, but what I now need to do is make some more refined changes right the way down at employee level. So the first one is to edit an employee. And as you can see here, we're editing this in this particular forecast. And that's because we could have two forecasts, but we can edit the employees differently in each forecast. So we can do some role play, some scenarioing, and say, well, if we did this, this is what it would cost us. If we did that, this is what it cost us. And then we can choose which one we're going to go with. So hence, the changes we make here are only applicable to this forecast. Now, obviously, we can search by the employee we want to maintain. And of course, the only employees we're going to see are the ones that work within our level of jurisdiction. So we're not going to be able to say all employees. And likewise, obviously you're going to have a lot of employees. You can do searches by name, that sort of thing, to filter an employee out. And then what we can also do is return how many different roles and positions this employee has in that time range. It could be that this employee during the next 3 years will have multiple roles and multiple positions. So we might want to choose which of those positions we're editing. And that's what return positions does, is gives us a list of their positions, and we can pick the one that we're editing. In this case, I know Amy has only got one position, and that is that she's a marketing executive. So again, down here, we've got various pieces of information that we can edit for Amy. And again, over here, we can override them in the white area. These are auto-calculated by the system for us. And here you can see that example of people being automatically incremented up the scale structure every year until they reach the limit of the scales for that grade. Now, it could be we've had a chat with Amy. She's probably unhappy. She don't think she's been paid enough, maybe threatening to leave. So this is a manager. This is where we can actually ignore the automation and say, well, OK, in this particular case, Amy, what we're going to do is make some changes there. So firstly, we need to decide what grade she's going to be. She's still going to be on grade 4. But what we can then do is say, well, what we will do is bump you up a couple of scales. So we'll move you up to a scale 20, and then the following year we'll honour the increases and move you up to a 21 and a 22. And that might keep Amy happy for a period of time. And again, as you can see here, as I'm overriding things, you can see that changing. So she's going to jump from a scale 17 up to a scale 20 next year. And that might keep her happy for a while. Alternatively, she might come back to us and say, look, that's fine, thank you very much for that, but I do intend to retire maybe in the next 2.5 years. You know, she might say to us, look, you've been fair to me with the increases, but I do want to give you a heads up that maybe in 2023, I'm looking at planning, you know, retiring at halfway through the year. And that basically will, when in the forecast, that will stop Amy's pay from that period in time from a forecasting point of view. A couple of things are going to happen here, though, which is quite interesting, and that is it's making an assumption that when Amy does leave, that we need to replace her with another worker. So this is actually going to create a vacant position from that time point onwards. And in the forecast, it will then forecast the vacant position out going forward. And that's where it might use the mid-scale point for how it's going to pay that new employee. Alternatively, what we could do is say, look, when Amy retires, what we're going to do is actually retire the role along with Amy leaving the business. And by putting a full end date in there, that means that the vacant position won't get generated, and maybe we're going to absorb Amy's workload across all the members of the team, something along that sort of line. So having made all of these changes, again, we could make changes to her hours. We could say that she's maybe we can talk her into going part-time rather than being full-time if she's looking at retiring. Other things that are interested in here is things like split costing. We do sometimes find that businesses want to take an employee but split their cost over 2 departments. Again, those are sort of things that we can manipulate and play with as well. But then, having done that, what we can now do is say, let's update Amy's employee record within the forecast. And then what we can do is see the impact of that in the forecast from Amy's paid cost point of view. So again, here we can see the breakdown of her payroll. We can see each position. So if she had multiple positions, we could see each position individually and then the total for Amy. And in this particular case, what we can see, there's quite a big jump in pay here. That's a combination of an inflationary increase and bumping her up the scale structure a little bit prematurely. And then we can see that that reduces the following year. And of course, as we now know, that's basically because Amy has said that she's going to leave at the end of June. So in the forecast, it's not going to forecast paying her from period 7 of that year onwards. The other things that we can change and maintain are things like allowances. So again, we can select an employee. We can select the allowance that we're going to give to an employee. We can select the employee in their position. We can select the department and cost centre, the business levels that's going to be applicable to, and then we can maintain the new allowances for an employee. So it might be we've got an employee and say, yes, in 6 months' time, we're going to give you a car allowance as a promotion, that sort of thing. So something that isn't currently in iTrent, but we do need to forecast for it. We can move employees around the business. Again, we often see things like restructures, and this is where the mass update could come in quite useful, is if you want to move a whole load of employees en masse from one department to another. Again, we can pick and choose the employee. We can retrieve their employee data. We can see where they're currently working. So the department, business unit, cost centre, whatever. And then we could set an end date for when that employee moves out of that department, and then where we can put some details in as to where we're moving them to. So again, moving people around the business, or as I say, that could be done en masse if you wanted to. Vacancies. Again, I mentioned earlier that the system will auto-generate vacancies for us when we put leave dates in for employees. So again, here what we can do is we can filter by departments, in this case by department and cost centre. In my example, we're only using 2 levels of analysis. We're not using the third one in iTrent. And here's the automated vacancy that it's created. So it creates a dummy vacancy record for us. When that's going to start. So this is based on the previous employee's leave date. And then again, we can start playing around with these sorts of things as to what grade and scale we're going to have the vacancy start on. In this case, it's coming in at midpoint scale, whether it's going to be full-time, if there's any split costing, what pensions there are, etc. And again, one of the things we've been asked for by some organisations is to put delays into the start date. You know, it could be an employee will hand the notice in and they've got to work 1 month's notice, but you know that it's going to take 3 months to recruit somebody into position. So what you can do is say, okay, in the forecast, stop paying the existing employee at the end of the month, but then we're going to have 2 months of not paying that cost while we're still recruiting, and then you know, we'll start paying it again in 3 months' time. Again, something that quite a few customers have asked us to include within the application. Other things that we can do, things like adding new positions. So we've got the automated vacancies for existing positions that now need replacing. But of course, you're always going to have new positions and new roles as you grow the business. So adding a new position would allow us to create a role that hasn't previously been there. Likewise, we can add new employees. These are often dummy employees when you're forecasting out several years into the future, because you don't know who that new employee is going to be yet. If it's something that's in the short term, then that's absolutely fine. You can fill in a few more details, but longer term new employees, you don't know who they're going to be. So we're creating dummy employees. And then what we have is the ability to move an employee into a particular role or position. And that could be one of these new employees that you've just created, or it could be an existing employee who you think is going to move into that position, and therefore we now need to create a vacant position for their old job. So the system will do those sorts of things for you. And then once you've done all of those, as a Power business user, again, you then have the option to start doing reports and analysis on all of that data. And as I mentioned earlier, some of these reports are repeated from a previous screen over here. So again, you know, we can come back over to here, look at the business level 1 report that we saw earlier, but then we could start drilling a bit deeper. You know, we could have a breakdown of a particular position. So here we could select a particular job role or position. So let's have a look at the financial analyst. Again, this is somebody who's due to be leaving. This is actually the person that the vacant position was created for. If you remember, the vacant position started in July, and that's because we know the current financial analyst has said he's going to leave at the end of June. You know, likewise, we could do something similar with employees. We also have some much more detailed list reports. So this is going to show data on employees and their positions. So again, in this case, we're looking at the finance department, which is broken down into 2 sub-departments or cost centres. And again, we can see a list of employees, and we can see a list of job roles. And of course, here we can see the vacant position that we talked about. Again, is coming in as you know, an extra role in there that replaces the financial analyst who we know leaving. So we've got all of those sorts of reports and analysis that the system will generate automatically for you. So there's lots of things we can do. It is worth mentioning that these are just standard out-of-the-box reports and analysis that we've created for you. There is an element of self-service reporting within IBM Planning Analytics. So if there isn't a report that exactly meets your requirements, you can create your own reports, and you can drag the forecast cube onto the page, and you can start dragging and dropping and slicing and dicing these dimensions to create new views. Alternatively, on top of that, you could even go down the route of starting to build scorecards and dashboards and things as well. Again, you know, we've got a couple of scorecards and dashboards that we've created, but often these will be dependent on your requirements. You'll know what you want to analyze, what you want to report. So, you know, you'll want to play around with that and change that. And IBM Planning Analytics has got a really powerful graphics and charting engine. You know, we've got sort of bar charts, column charts, line charts. Here we're looking at heat map. And then up here, what you can see is a whole host of different types of charts and analysis that you could create and put on your dashboard. So it's very configurable in that respect. It probably is also mentioning on the analysis side, we've also created a lot of Excel authored reports. Planning Analytics has an Excel add-in, and that Excel add-in allows you to use Excel to author reports that sit on top of the forecasting database. So again, what we can see here, this is originally authored in Excel, but it's been delivered using them through the web. You can see again, we can choose our versions, we can choose our years, and then again, we can select level 1 business area, and then we get a whole report based on that. And again, if we take a quick look at this, you know, in this particular time period, we can see we've got Gordon here, who's the financial controller. He's on grade 6, but for part of the time he's going to be on scale 32, then he's getting upgraded to scale 33. And then what we've got is his pay breakdown. When he started, is he full-time, how many FTEs we've got. This is quite important because, again, obviously a lot of the data that we've been looking at is cost-based, but of course it isn't always about cost. Sometimes when you're doing establishment reporting, you're looking at headcount and FTEs against budget and looking at your establishment. So being able to report on non-numeric data, non-financial data, you know, is something that you might want to do. And again, you can see here's that example of that finance analyst who's due to leave at the end of June. So as you can see, it's a very comprehensive, automated planning and forecasting tool. We've only really scratched the surface of, you know, all the reporting and all the analysis that spins out to the side of this. You know, things like variance reporting. You know, you might create 2 forecasts, forecast A, forecast B. One is based on a 2% increase, one is based on a 3% increase. Let's compare one version with the other and see what the variance is between the two, so we can work out whether we can afford doing the 3% rather than the 2%. I mean, you know, you've got lots and lots of choices there. So that's new iTrent salary modelling application. As I mentioned, it's created using a piece of technology called IBM Planning Analytics, and it's a blueprint application that we can provide to anybody who's an iTrent customer. So hopefully you found that useful. Obviously, if you've got any questions, then you can obviously chat to us about those, and I will answer them, you know, for you. Thanks very much.